Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on language teaching methods in Europe in early modern times. Well, my dear students, I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would have some understanding of the developments in language teaching methods in Europe during the early modern times. Well, in Europe before the 16th century, much of the language teaching was with reference to teaching Latin to priests. And in the 16th and the 17th centuries, in fact, French was a lingua franca for speaking to foreigners. Now, this concept of French as a lingua franca, to understand that, you can compare it to the status of English that is used for communication everywhere, and in today's world, English is a lingua franca. In the same way, French was the main language that would be used to communicate with any foreigners during the 16th and the 17th centuries. Well, French was the language for court, it was for the travelers, it was used by the traders as well as by the soldiers. In other words, French was fairly widely used in almost all the domains of life, in almost all the spheres of human activity. French was fairly widely taught also during this period because this was considered to be, as I earlier said, a lingua franca. Same questions were considered as are today about the practice versus learning rules, study versus informal rule. So this is one of the important aspects of language teaching methods and how they were taken up in Europe in the early modern times. There were certain questions that were raised about what should be the practices of language teaching, whether rules should be taught or there should be formal or informal studies of language. Well, my dear students, as far as the status of Latin changed during this period from a living language to a dead language, now this had its own impact. Now they studied it as an intellectual exercise only. Now this was not for the purposes of communication. The analysis of the grammar and of the rhetoric of classical Latin thus became a model that was used for the teaching of language between the 17th, from the 17th actually to the 19th centuries. So for a period of almost 3 centuries, the model of grammar that was taken from classical Latin, it was followed as a sample to teach language. Now, this was a time when it was thought about language teaching, a lot. There was a lot of focus was given. It was crystallized actually in Europe during this time period. There was an emphasis that was given on learning grammar rules and to learn vocabulary by rote, that is through memorization of vocabulary. Also, there was a focus on translations and practice in writing simple sample sentences, was given. So overall, this was how, language teaching methods evolved in Europe during the early modern times.